What Judaism is this, man? Like, where has this been my entire life? This is crazy. You know, it literally felt like a completely different religion, but I really liked it because it was no longer just a storybook. It was something that applied to me personally.
Can you tell us your name and where you grew up?
My name is Charles Goldberg, and I am from the holy city of Buffalo Grove, Illinois. So I'm a clinical psychotherapist. I specialize in addictions. I also specialize in helping people with their romantic relationships. But of course, in order to ensure my mom is proud of me, I'm also a professional rapper. And Baruch Hashem, I've been blessed that now I speak in Chabad houses all around the world, from Amsterdam to Arizona and everything in between, talking about my journey towards Yiddishkeit and mental health and all other fun topics that are associated with that. So catch me in a Chabad house near you.
Can you tell us what your childhood was like in terms of Judaism and Jewish practice?
I grew up in a Jewish home. Both my parents are Jews. But we didn't really understand Judaism, to put it lightly. We went to like a conservative reform type shul. I'll put it to you like this. I was bar mitzvahed on a Saturday night with a female rabbi. After the day, or before I actually turned 13. So yeah, complicated to say the least. It was really funny. I always like to tell the story of like on Passover, when it's time to wash your hands, my dad would like literally go to the bathroom and wash his hands like he was scrubbing up for surgery. So we didn't know, like no one knew in my family any better. And so yeah, that was kind of it. We kept kosher, kind of. You know, there was a separation of milk and meat, but to look at a hechsher was like totally not a thing. And I liked Hebrew school a lot. You know, I went to the Hebrew school at my congregation, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. And ultimately, when I was growing up, I also saw like Judaism kind of became like a profession for me. I worked as a teacher's aide, and then I worked as a Hebrew school teacher. And I was working basically every night of the week. So it was a very just, Americanized version of growing up Jewish.
You mentioned that you liked Hebrew school. What do you remember about Hebrew school? Any specific Jewish messages you learned or practices that you enjoyed or connected to?
I mean, so here's the thing. I mean, I really did. I liked Hebrew school and I was good at it. You have to understand, I've never been a great student. So when I was in Hebrew school, it was always something, you know, I'll put it to you like this, interesting thing. So if you haven't noticed already, I have ADHD. And one of the things that's really interesting about ADHD, it's not that kids with ADHD can't concentrate. They can only concentrate on the things that they find highly stimulating. And for me, Judaism was always very stimulating. But, you know, so therefore I was pretty good at it. But the problem was also like, I don't know, it wasn't really taught to me in a way where it was like Torah is truth. It was taught to me more in a way of like, you know, the Torah is kind of like a storybook. You try to read a little bit of Hebrew. You try to pray a little bit.
You mentioned that during high school, you started to teach in Hebrew school and Judaism felt like a profession. Do you want to talk a little more about what that meant and how you moved on from that?
You know, it was interesting. I needed money. Okay, so I'll put it to you like this. When I was in high school, I was a bit of a bad boy. I did no homework. At one point, I was in like 5 simultaneous relationships at once. It's before social media. I was lying to everyone. My parents were very disappointed. But one of the things that happens when you're in that many relationships is like you need to take people out. And my parents weren't about to support this habit that I had. And so I needed money. And so the job at the Hebrew school was available to me. I was pretty good at it. And so I took it. And obviously I worked as many hours as I humanly could. But it was also really special because, you know, it was cool when you teach kids and they master a concept. It's like, it's a very cool experience. I remember, for their graduation, I think I was working with like a 5th grade class or something. I taught the kids the Havdalah service. You know, I taught, it's a simple service. It's like a page, whatever, but I taught them the whole thing. I taught them the melodies. I taught them everything. And by the end, the kids knew it. And I was like, oh, they learned that from me. Like, that's kind of cool. So I don't know, wanting to spread Judaism was always kind of a thing with me. And I don't entirely know why that was. It felt really good knowing that I was making like a positive difference. And it kind of gave me, I always had this desire. It's interesting because on the one hand, like I really wanted to be a good Jewish boy. On the other hand, I was really not a good kid at all. And kind of dealing with that divide. I don't know. It felt like when I was working in the synagogue, like I wasn't such a disaster. you know? So that also like made it appeal to me tremendously.
So when did things begin to change?
Things had to get worse before they got better. I remember like when you get bar mitzvah, you meet with the rabbi, right? And the rabbi gets to know you a little bit in like the hour that he meets with you. I had a really nice rabbi. His name was Howard Lifshitz. And I remember his face. I could see his face in my head. He said to me like, Charles, what do you like about yourself? I didn't have an answer. It was very hard for me. I was 13. And that was the first time that like a red flag went up. And I was like, oh boy, this isn't a good sign. And I mean, that's the reason why I was trying to date so many different people, is because, you know, in retrospect and now as a therapist, I'm able to see that like, I just felt like very insecure about myself. I was getting gratification from other people, from getting their attention, from getting their love, that I didn't feel like I was having elsewhere. So, I mean, senior prom was pretty bad. Barely graduating from high school was horrible. In 2018, my high school was rated the best high school in the United States, called Adlai E. Stevenson High School. There were like 1,000 kids in my class, and I did terribly. I did like no homework. I was totally disinterested. I was just like, I'm killing myself and I'm getting a mark on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter. I have other more stimulating things that I could do. And so that's kind of how I, you know, directed myself. What I can say though, is that, you know, I had to go to college. I knew I needed to continue my education. Everyone in my school went to college. And so I remember I was a senior. I was walking down the hall one day, and I heard these two people talking, and they were saying, yeah, it's really easy to get into the University of Kansas. And so I was like, whatever, I'll apply. And I did. I applied. And it was the only state school that I actually got into. And I didn't know anyone. And that was very terrifying. You know, I didn't exactly get along with my parents. By the time I got to Kansas, I mean, I on the one hand, I was really happy to be away from home. On the other hand, I was really homesick. I knew no one. I was truly alone for the first time in my life. And, you know, I was still dating these girls. They now lived in different states. But I kind of said to myself, like, I have two different options here. It's either I pull my act together and I proceed through school, or I'm going to be stuck being at home again with parents who are disappointed in me. And I kind of saw the latter option as unacceptable. And I said to myself, like, whatever I got to do, I'm not going to let myself fall, you know. But that was a hard thing to do, given the fact, like, you know, the point in high school is you develop, you know, study habits, stuff like that. I didn't have any study habits. So yeah, I wanted to do well. I just didn't know how. So I wasted no time in not doing well very quickly and kind of getting sucked into college life. Why study when there's so much like cool stuff to do? So it was a really challenging time. I mean, you're put into this environment where everything is trying to grab your attention. Everything is trying to distract you, and somehow you have to stay focused. And that was never my forte. So it was a tough period. It was definitely a difficult adjustment for me.
During this difficult time where you mentioned there were a lot of distractions and it was hard to focus, how did you pull yourself out of that? And was there any incident that rekindled your earlier interest in Judaism that you spoke about before?
Absolutely. So it was interesting. You know, there were a few things that happened. My freshman year, I had this roommate, Martin. And Martin's like, you know, a Jew from Tennessee. Every night before we went to bed, we always listened to Matisyahu. So Matisyahu was this reggae musician who also happened to be a Hassidic Jew, and later I found out was a Chabadnik. And so we listened to him every night before we went to sleep. And really the reason why we listened to him is because, like, we loved the fact he was Jewish. Like, we were just, I don't know, we were proud Jews. It's not that we were so religious. We just had a lot of pride. There were a variety of interesting things that kind of happened that slowly but surely, you know, contributed to my Jewish growth. I mean, the most prolific thing was in Kansas, you have these preachers who come on campus, right? And they say a lot of really hateful things about a lot of people, specifically Jews. They say Jews go to hell and some other very tasteful things. There was one particular preacher who was very, very hateful. And for whatever reason, he was so hateful, a lot of students gathered around him. We're talking like literally 500, 1,000 students, a lot of students filled up this area of campus called Wesco Beach, right? And he was screaming like, all Jews go to hell, all gays go to hell. And I wanted to do something. A lot of people were like throwing eggs at him and trying to like cover him in ketchup. I wanted to be a little bit more over the top. And so what I did is I had a tallis that my grandfather gave me. with me. And so I ran back to where I was living. I grabbed my talis, I grabbed my yarmulke, put it on my head. I davened mincha standing next to the guy. And the thing that was really interesting about that whole thing, there were other Jews who were there. And the one part of this whole thing that I remember very clearly, I remember saying the Kaddish out loud. And it was funny because when I got to Yehesh Me Rava, like everyone responded. Like it was a very cool moment of like Jewish unity that occurred. But like I was standing there.
Why do you think you reacted that way? Where do you think it came from?
There was just this very protective instinct that came over me where I knew I had to do something. You could call this, a neshama, you could call this a pinta yid. But I always wanted to protect the Jewish people. I always wanted to keep them safe. And I think that's really where it came from. I wanted to make everyone feel safe because when this dude is screaming and he's hateful, I just wanted to do something. I didn't want to just stand back and take it.
So at that point in your life, would you say that Judaism was like was something you felt like you needed to protect more than like a lifestyle and a religion? How did you feel about what did being Jewish mean to you at that point in your life?
The idea is like, yeah, I cared deeply about Judaism. The only problem was I didn't know much about Judaism. I wanted to protect Judaism, but I didn't know what I was protecting. I knew Jewish people were important. I knew that the Torah is important, but if you asked me anything deeper than that, I couldn't tell you.
So how did you then go about getting to know what Judaism was about?
Oh, so there's a real story. So anyway, what ends up happening, there was a rabbi who happened to move in on campus, beard, black hat and all. His name is Rabbi Zalman Teichtel and his wife Nechama and his daughter Minna. They moved in to the University of Kansas and they set up shop immediately. They start out with a barbecue, right? So I go to this barbecue and I go up to the rabbi. I'm like, Rabbi, what's going on? He's like, yeah, that's really cool. I told him I'm a rapper. Yes, in fact, I was that big of a tool that was like the first thing I had to tell everyone. So I'm a rapper. And he's like, oh, that's so cool. I know Matisyahu, he says. Now, I guarantee you he didn't know Matisyahu, but it's like, I know Matisyahu. I'm like, really? Whoa, I love Matisyahu. He's dope. And the rabbi's like, yeah, in fact, you know what? I can make a class. Let's do a class all about learning his lyrics. And I'm like, seriously? He's like, yeah, let's do it. So the rabbi made a class and it was unbelievable. He taught Matisyahu's lyrics. There were only about like 4 or 5, 6 of us that showed up to this class. He made really good brownies. The brownies were also, that's like a thing, okay? When you're in college, if there's free food that's being offered, you're going to that. Like that is the most important thing you're going to learn in college. If there's free food, you go, okay? So anyway, he did this class and I remember we started off with the song Chop 'Em Down. So this song, it's from the forest itself comes the handle to the axe. It's a great song. But, what the rabbi explained was, he said, from the forest itself, from the obstacle, comes the handle to the axe, lies the solution, right? And this was very profound to me. He was explaining that from the problem lies the solution, meaning you can't fix a problem unless you know what the problem is. When you go to see a doctor, if you say, oh, my side is hurting, if the doctor just starts operating, he's going to kill you, right? They have to do tests. They have to figure out what the problem is before it could actually be fixed. For me at that time, I always knew that there was something off. I just couldn't put my finger on it. That really got the gears in my head turning. I started really asking myself, what is it that was missing? And so that song, from the forest itself comes the handle to the axe, like it really spoke to me. And again, that was just the beginning. Then, we got to like King Without a Crown and we started learning about, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov. And I'm like learning this and I'm like, what Judaism is this, man? Like, where has this been my entire life? This is crazy. It literally felt like a completely different religion, but I really liked it because it was no longer just a storybook. It was something that applied to me personally. And that was really important for me because at the end of the day, it's like, if you can't, it's a living Torah. If you're not living it, then what is it? How is it different than any other book, So I needed that application. I needed something that I could grab onto. And that kind of began my whole Jewish observance. I mean, I'll tell you, it was interesting. Ultimately, the rabbi sat me down. He said to me, Charles, why don't you tell me about yourself? And I decided I'm going to mess with him. I'm going to tell him the truth about everything, right? I'm going to tell him about things I'm doing in the fraternity that aren't very kosher. I'm going to tell him all the lies I've told. I'm going to tell him everything. And I was just expecting him to be like another person, another authority figure, to get angry at me, yell at me, be disappointed in me. And I remember at the end of what I was saying to him, I was crying. He was really upset. And he looks at me and he says, Charles, you know what? I'm jealous of you. I said, you're jealous of me? My life is falling apart. What do you mean you're jealous of me? He says, I'm jealous of you because I have a direction in life. I know what I'm doing. I'm married. I have, I have a career. I know what I'm doing as a rabbi. I have a kid. My life is set. He said, with you, you have many challenges to overcome. And he says to me, the greatest people have the greatest challenges. So he said, I'm jealous of you because as low as you are right now is how high you're going to be able to reach. That was the first time in my life that a Chabad rabbi, or any rabbi, any authority figure, really showed me love and understanding and compassion. Rabbi Zalman's reaction to me was very, very unique. It was very unique and really made everything different for me. So I don't know, I threw myself into Chabad. I hit all the classes that he offered. So that was a really cool experience. I'll tell you, I would show up on Shabbos and I would drive. And, this girl, we were kind of off and on. So she would text me all day and then I'd be like sneaking out of the Chabad house to my car to like look and see if she texted me or whatever. And someone would just kind of pull one of these. And the thing is that he never said anything. But when he knew I was like into Chabad, like I was there, I was ready, I was good, he ultimately said to me, Charles, look, dude, you're done with the car thing. Like you have to walk to shul. So one of the first Shabbos, it probably was the first Shabbos I ever truly kept. And when people first started keeping Shabbos for the first time, they're like really anxious for it to be done, right? Like you have that anxiety, I want to check my phone. On Shabbos, he had just started. He had just opened up shop. So I was literally like, Friday nights we would get students, but Saturday I was basically the only one who showed up initially. Soon there were like 3 or 4 people, but I was the first one. And what was really cool is like, first I would daven, and it started where Zalman would just be flipping pages for me. But then he said, you have to pray, especially when I was really struggling with like the depression. He's like, you have to pray. And so what I would do is I would lock myself in his office. I would actually lie on the floor because I was feeling terrible. And I would do the whole Shacharit service in Hebrew. It would take me, I'm not even exaggerating when I say this, it would take me like 5 hours. I would read everything. And part of the reason why it would take so long is because as I'm trying to read, my mind is telling me, you're terrible, you're horrible. And ultimately what happened was I had to learn how to kind of deal with my thoughts. I was able to redirect my thinking from my thoughts to the words on the page. And after weeks, 5 hours turned to 4, 4 turned to 2. Now I do Shacharit like a normal person in like 45 minutes.
When you were praying, did you understand what you were saying?
Not a word. But I will tell you, I didn't understand a thing I was saying. But what I can tell you is that, Zalman also taught me that, at the end of the Amidah, that's when you have to really like start talking to God. You just have to have a heart to heart. And I had some really good heart to hearts, and that really, it's almost like he's Bodadus, right? Like that was that was where the bond really began. That's really where I started understanding like, this is why I'm here. So davening for me was like a very, very powerful tool in just overcoming myself. But I can't tell you enough. So that was very transformative. So
would you say that Morristown and your yeshiva experience was when you decided that the Jewish observant lifestyle was for you?
I mean, actually, I think it really began when I graduated. That was really the test. When I graduated from Kansas and I moved to Delaware, that was when I really began recognizing like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this Jewish stuff. That's where I started wearing a yarmulke consistently every day. It was a little bit before that, but it's like, I don't know. I knew I was going to do this in Delaware. Like that was really the test. In Kansas is like, for me, it was kind of like Brooklyn, right? I had my safe haven. I had my Chabad house. I had a rabbi who was, on top of me to make sure that I was doing stuff. But in Delaware, that wasn't a guarantee. So Delaware was the real test. Like, can I keep this up? And thank God I did. What Hassidic philosophy and really what Chabad in general is promoting is you have to be yourself. Every Jew matters. We're born with a purpose. This is absolutely vital to recognize because many other faiths, they want you to change for them. Judaism says, don't change. be yourself, but if you're going to be yourself, be even more yourself. Be your truest self. Access your neshama. Access the true purpose of why you're here. And understand that, we can only understand our purposes if we connect with the entity that actually put us in the world with purpose.